Hey everyone, Sam here, thanks for joining me. In this video I'm going to take you on a little outdoor painting adventure with me, and I'm going to show you how to paint a landscape on plein air and give you some tips on plein air painting in general. So without further ado, we'll just get straight into the video and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so I'm just driving to a location that's not far away from where I live. I really want to get down to the South Island in New Zealand sometime and paint some more epic mountains, but in the meantime I'm going to just have to make do with what's around in my local area. And actually there's some pretty cool things to paint around here. I really love like rolling green hills and trees, so there's lots of that around here. It's a nice time of year as well, it's the end of summer and the sun's a bit lower in the sky, so there's some cool light and awesome clouds and all sorts of cool stuff to create a plein air landscape painting. So I'm just driving around and see what I can find. Okay, so I've just parked up at the side of the road and I think this looks like a pretty good spot to paint, so I'll go and set up over here. Yep, I think I'm going to paint that view over there. Nice simple landscape. Look good in a plein air painting, I think. Once I decided on the view that I was going to paint, I began setting up my plein air painting gear. So this includes a tripod, my Alla Prima Pashar box which mounts on it, then my paints, brushes and canvas panels. So that's all my gear set up. I'm going to paint that view over there and I'm ready to go. I'll just tell you the colours I'm using. I'm using Blue Ridge oil paints, and I'm using titanium white, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, cadmium red light, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue and phthalo green. So I'm using oil paint, also mixing it with liquid original. That will help to speed up the drying time and improve the flow of the paint. So I'll get started. I'm painting on an 8" by 8" linen panel, and it's a medium weave oil prime linen and it's mounted to Baltic birch. So these are perfect for painting outdoors on plein air. These panels are made by a company called Seascape in the USA at canvaspanels.com. I've put a link in the description box below if you want to get some. I'm sketching out the composition using burnt sienna mixed with liquid original. And liquid original just speeds up the drying time, which is why it's absolutely perfect for painting outdoors on plein air. Quite often the liquid will have already started to dry a little bit, even within an hour or so of painting, especially if it's warm. At the time of recording this video, it was the end of summer in New Zealand, so the weather was still pretty warm. It was about 25 degrees when I was painting, so a nice temperature to paint in. Now I picked a nice day to go painting on, lots of sunshine and a few clouds as well. But generally when you paint outdoors, it's always a good idea to paint your dark values and shadows first. And value is how light or dark your subject is. But the reason you want to do this is because the light moves and changes, and suddenly the weather conditions can just change on a dime, especially in New Zealand. So 1 minute it could be sunny, you could be starting off and you're painting and it's nice, bright and sunny, and then suddenly within half an hour it's clouded over and the weather conditions have completely changed and you've lost all your light. So if you paint your dark values and shadows first, then you'll have a much better idea of where the areas in light are, so that even if it does cloud over, you can still remember which parts of the painting are going to be in the full light. Also, using modern technology as well, I often take a few reference photos with my iPhone as well, just in case the weather conditions do change, and then I can refer to my iPhone, the pictures I took there, to complete a painting, and I've done that loads of times. So I've started off by painting the cloud shadows, even though the values of these is quite a lot lighter, but I still consider that in my darks because they're in shadow. And I used a mix of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, titanium white and just a little bit of alizarin crimson. And I love the combination of these three colours plus white. You can create so many versatile colours that you'll see in the landscape. Lots of neutral greys, things like cloud shadows, distant shadows, rocks and mountain shadows, and even tree shadows. It's just a really versatile colour mix to use because you can adjust it in so many ways. So we'll find our more lighter shadows in the distance, and then as we move forward in the landscape towards the foreground, those shadows are going to be getting darker, and especially in the trees, because trees are some of the darkest values to be found in the landscape. Now, even for these shadows at this point in the painting, I just use a mix of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white and alizarin crimson, but then using much less titanium white as I move forward into the foreground. Then after that is a time to apply some colour and paint the areas that are in light. So I next painted the highlights in the clouds. This was just a mix of titanium white with a little burnt sienna, and then painted the sky itself, which is ultramarine blue, titanium white and a little phthalo green. Now, skies are some of the more lighter values to be found in the landscape, so we really don't want to go dark here at all. I'm also using some of the biggest brushes I can get away with, a lot of number 5 flat brushes and also number 3 filberts and flat brushes. This is perfect for this size of painting. I'm using Rosemary & Co brushes, and if you want to get some, I've put a link in the description box below. Now here I was painting the trees in the background, and that was a mix of mainly ultramarine blue with some yellow ochre, titanium white and even a little alizarin crimson. Also added in a little bit of phthalo green as well, just to increase the saturation a little. And then just as I was painting those distant trees, suddenly half the landscape came into shadow with the clouds overhead, and then I thought, wow, that would make a really great effect in my painting. So I had a bit of a change here, because originally when I started this I was just going to paint the whole thing in light, but then adding these shadows, which is what I'm doing here, I'm painting the grass shadows, I thought that would make a much cooler effect in the painting and make it more engaging, give it more atmosphere. This is the cool thing about plein air painting, because quite often you are sort of making some of it up as you go along, but if you're prepared to just make some split-second changes as well for when the weather changes, quite often I've created some really epic paintings outdoors that, to start with, I didn't realise that was how they were going to turn out. So I decided to make this whole mid-ground in shadow because that's what I saw in the landscape, and I just thought this will be a great effect. So I mixed up a darker shade of green for the grass, reasonably desaturated as well, because grass is one of the lighter values in the landscape, so I didn't want it too dark, but it had to be dark enough. Now this was a mix of yellow ochre with ultramarine blue, a little bit of cadmium yellow and some alizarin crimson, also a little phthalo green. There's titanium white in there as well, but not that much. And then once I'd painted that, I then started painting the grass that was in the distance. This is ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, a little cadmium yellow, titanium white. These are the main base colours. There's also some alizarin crimson in there and some phthalo green. Now the alizarin crimson, the red element in it, is just going to help to desaturate the green, because red is opposite to green on the colour wheel, so it has that cancelling out effect. Because I don't want the grass to be overly saturated in the distance, because that will come forward in the painting, and if that happens it will start to make the painting look flat. So we want to create that atmospheric perspective, make those hills in the distance look like they're in the distance. But the whole thing of this painting, the whole point I wanted to make with it, is just to get some of those nice rich greens that you see in these rolling hills here in northern New Zealand where I'm painting. I'm based in Northland, so this is just down the road from where I live, and it's really characterised by these rolling green hills. Also, it kind of reminds me of the sort of rolling green hills you get in Devon in southwest England, which is where I grew up. Now, one of the things about painting this type of landscape is I haven't overcomplicated the composition at all. In fact, when you're plein air painting, it's very often the more simple compositions make for some of the most engaging and effective painting. I just wanted to capture that sense of space and that mellow atmosphere that you get in the countryside. It was a really nice afternoon to paint as well, so just wanted to capture that atmosphere in the painting. Now as I work my way here to the foreground, the grass here, as I say, I wanted to capture some of those rich grass greens, so I've increased the saturation of my colour. So I'm still using ultramarine blue, and cadmium yellow as my base for my green, and there's also a little bit of yellow ochre in there, although a lot less than compared to what I used in the background. But as I say, these are the base colours for my green mix. Then I've mixed in titanium white, so that's going to make the value lighter. Also has a desaturating effect as well, so this I need to keep in mind. And then I've balanced out the green by mixing in some cadmium red light, and generally I only mainly use cadmium red light more in foreground areas of a landscape because it's quite a strong colour. So I don't want it overly saturated, but I don't want it turning the colour so much so that I end up creating olives and browns. I only need a little bit. And then the other ingredient in there, phthalo green, which is this really potent, strong emerald green. It's got a really high tinting strength, but if you just use a small amount with an existing green that you've made with yellow and blue, you can get some really tasty, rich greens with it. And that's what I've added here in my painting. Now, it's been a little while since I've been outdoors plein air painting, and I really need to get back into it and do it more often. But why paint outdoors? Well, for me, it's really helped to improve my landscape painting, especially a few years ago where I spent a lot of time plein air painting when I was living in Queenstown, which is near the bottom of the South Island in New Zealand, and I was just out painting mountains. But I had so many aha light bulb moments from painting outdoors where I really start to study the landscape and really start to get my head around values and colours and tonality within the landscape. So I feel like the quality of my painting really improved when I started painting outside. Also, there's the other thing. You need to try and paint quickly, often because the light and the weather conditions are changing. So that's one of the things with painting outdoors, is it teaches you to paint quickly. Don't be precious about your brush marks or putting in loads of fine detail. You just want to get that information down. So for me, when I paint outdoors, I tend to paint in a loose painterly style. It's the time when I can be loose and painterly and be really expressive with my brushwork and just get that information down, those values and those colours. You're just trying to create the atmosphere of the day. The cool thing about plein air paintings is you can then use them as studies for larger paintings. So you can use them as reference material of the colours that you got out in the field, and then refer to it when you want to develop an idea further and actually paint a larger studio painting of the scene that you've painted, for example. So at this point in the painting, I've got my basic colours and values down, and then the next thing I do is I start to sort of tidy up the whole thing, readjust some of the values where needed, add in some more shadows and restate the dark values. I always go back and do that. And at this point in the painting, the liquid original that I've mixed in with the paint is already starting to form a bit of a tack, so it's actually easier to layer on some more paint over the top. And this is, as I say, especially effective when the weather's warm as well. It does seem to dry the paint a bit quicker. So now I've just restated some of these cloud shadows, and a way you can communicate effective looking clouds, especially in a plein air painting, is to paint some solid shadow at the cloud bases. So I just use sweeping brush marks, and it really helps to define the shape of the clouds. Now, I added some lighter values to the clouds as well for the highlights. This was a mix of titanium white with a little burnt sienna and yellow ochre. And then you can actually paint the negative spaces around the cloud with your sky mix, which is what I did here. And it's still using the same colours I was using a moment ago, just adding another thicker layer. Now, once I painted that dark area of grass where the clouds were casting a shadow over it, the next thing I had to do was make those trees a lot darker. Now, as I said, trees are some of the darkest values to be found in the landscape, and as you saw just before then, that the trees that I'd started to paint were lost already, so I had to make the value of these trees a lot darker, mostly using a mix of ultramarine blue with some yellow ochre, a little phthalo green, and also a little alizarin crimson. And then next I made the value a little bit lighter, but I also painted some shadows in some of those distant trees. Also adding shadows to the trees in the foreground, such as this tortora tree here. This is a native New Zealand tree. It's an evergreen tree. Kind of looks a little bit, or at least the foliage looks a little bit like the English yew, but it's not even in the same plant family. But it's got this kind of like greenish olive coloured foliage, and they look quite dark in the landscape. There's a mixture of native New Zealand trees here and also introduced European trees such as poplars and willow trees, so you get a mixed bag here. We're at a latitude where it's kind of pretty far north in New Zealand anyway, and we're kind of bordering on the subtropics, so we've got this sort of transition zone between the trees you get in temperate environments and then some subtropical kind of vegetation as well, so makes for interesting paintings. We also had a lot of rain as well at the time I was painting this, so the grass is looking super green as well, so this is good for some landscape paintings. Now the brushes I'm using here are starting to get a little bit smaller, mostly using number 3 filbert brushes, and what I like about these is it's got the rounded edge of the bristles, so these are good for painting foliage and vegetation, but then you've still got the broad end of the brush as well. Now if you'd like to learn more about painting landscapes and you just want to get inspired as well by my painting style, then you've got to check out my Patreon channel. Each month I upload a full painting tutorial, which is normally about an hour long, and I show you how to paint a particular subject, often a landscape painting, and I show you everything, how to mix all the colours, explain the composition, explain about colours and value, and I show you how to mix all the colours which I demonstrate on my palette as well. So if you want to learn about colour mixing in the context of the painting, then my Patreon channel is definitely for you. Not only that, I provide lesson notes and reference photos, and from now on I'm going to be uploading weekly content as well to Patreon, so there's going to be all sorts of things about painting landscapes, also sharing some of my artistic journey with you. So if that interests you, it's just $5 a month. And the other thing with Patreon is you can cancel at any time, so there's no commitment to it. Just try it out for a month and see what you think. Anyway, I've put the link to my Patreon channel in the description box below. Now back to the painting here, and I'm just getting more of the textures and colours into the trees here especially. So painting some of these deciduous trees, as I say, there's some willows and poplars in there. Some of these willows had seemed to have lost their leaves already, or at least had only very few leaves left on them, even though it's, well, mid-March at the moment at the time of recording it, which in New Zealand is technically autumn, but it still feels like summer at the moment. The weather's actually been really good. But you can see that there are elements in the landscape that are starting to look a bit tired and dry, that kind of transition time at the end of summer as you're going into autumn. So I'm just building up more texture and details into this painting. Now I'll talk a little bit more about a piece of equipment that I'm using for my plein air painting, and that's my Alla Prima pochade box. This is made by a guy called Ben Haggett, and he lives in Montana in the USA, and he literally hand makes all of these, and they're so beautifully constructed. If you're gonna spend time painting outdoors, which as I say I would definitely recommend, especially if you're a landscape painter, then you need to get yourself a good pochade box. And the cool thing about this is you can store your wet panels in it. It's got a painting palette on it, you can store paints inside, and also it's quite compact as well. It's got friction hinges where the actual easel is, so it's just a really useful pochade box to use. The other thing is it mounts on a standard camera tripod. So a great piece of kit. You can also use it in your art studio. Now what I'm doing here is I'm restating more of these dark values in the landscape here. So painting these shadows, because these shadows are really what's going to help communicate the three-dimensional forms of the elements within the landscape that I'm painting. So it's really bringing the painting together. Now another reason I love to paint outdoors is I find it incredibly meditative and really helps to calm my mind, especially when, you know, there's things in life that are just getting on top of you. I've got a lot going on anyway, and sometimes it's nice to just quiet my mind by coming outdoors plein air painting, because the thing about painting outdoors is it locks you in the present moment. You're focusing on the landscape you're painting. So generally when I'm painting, I'm not thinking about anything else apart from the painting and I'm creating. In fact, quite often when I've finished painting, I barely even remember the actual process of painting it. It's like I go into this total deep zone of concentration. And as I say, I find it very calming and meditative. So that's another reason for painting outdoors, and this is why I love it so much. Not only that, you're outside in the fresh air. For me, I like painting when it's more sunny as well. I just love being outside in the sun, so it's a cool way that I can be out in the sun and work. But I appreciate it's not always possible for everyone to paint outdoors, and certainly if you haven't done it before, it can be a little bit intimidating. And I did actually make a video on how to get over your fear of painting outdoors, but it's something I would recommend. And if you've not done it before, you could start with something really simple by just painting outside in your garden first of all. You don't actually have to go out in the public. There's all sorts of things you can paint outside. I'm actually dying to get down to the South Island again at some point so I can paint mountains, but for now I'm just going to enjoy what's around me. And as I say, I've got loads of great subjects to paint around me, lots of these rolling hills, rural landscapes which I love. They may not be as dramatic as mountains, but I still love painting these rich greens, and I just love being outdoors in the fresh air painting these types of landscapes. So how about you, my viewers? Do you paint outdoors? Is it something you like to do, or is it something you'd like to try? Do you have any cool plein air painting stories or any plein air painting disasters? Let me know in the comments section below. Now, it was at this point in the painting that I was starting to wrap up the whole thing and finish it off. One of the things I did with the trees was just paint the suggestion of a few stems and branches, mainly in this willow tree that's more in the foreground, that's lost most of its leaves. And then I was just adding a few extra darker value colour to the trees in the midground. Then one of the things that I felt that this painting needed was some cows. So I painted the suggestion of a few cows in the midground, just adds a bit of life to the painting. And whilst there wasn't any cows directly in front of me, I could see some in the distance, so I just marked in their basic shapes. As I say, it just adds a nice little bit of life into the painting. And one of the last things I did here was just to paint a few shadows by the cows, which is going to help with the three-dimensional effect of the painting. But with that, the painting was complete. And there it is. So it's a pretty loose painting, but I can use this as a study for a more detailed painting back in the studio. Alright, I hope you enjoyed that little plein air painting experience with me. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more painting tutorial videos. Thanks for watching. I hope you're having a beautiful day, and I'll see you in the next video.